On Mars in the year 2044, the Tantalus research station nears the end of its 6-month mission. Today's their departure day. In less than a day, the spaceship Aurora will arrive from Earth for pickup. Vincent and Rebecca are traversing the Martian wasteland in a rover, heading towards a dig site, when they spot a dust storm brewing on the horizon. Reaching the site, Vincent radios Kim, informing her it's time to head back to base and prepare for their return journey. However, Kim disregards his message, consumed by her quest for valuable samples and continuing to dig. As they wait, Vincent expresses his annoyance with Kim's stubbornness and his lack of enthusiasm for the long voyage back to Earth, despite his longing for home. Finally returning to the rover, Kim grumbles about leaving empty-handed, claiming 6 months wasn't enough time to achieve any significant results. On their way back, Captain Charles contacts them, urging them to speed up as they need their help to fix the communication link with the Aurora. Back at the base, Richard manages to re-establish the signal, but also needs to address a power issue caused by the storm. Meanwhile, Marco approaches Charles for a final trip to the dig site, needing to repair a malfunctioning gamma sensor. Initially hesitant, Charles grants permission, instructing him to take Richard along and return before nightfall. Upon arrival, Kim witnesses Marco and Richard departing and complains about the unfairness of being forced back while the men get another outing. En route to the dig site, Richard receives a bombshell from Marco. He lied about their mission. They're not there to fix anything, but to collect a sample of a so-called microscopic anomaly. Back at base, Vincent tackles repairs on the cooling system while catching up with Robert, the team's psychologist. Vincent expresses his concern about the Aurora's erratic approach pattern, likening it to drunk driving. Meanwhile, Kim, suspicious of Marco's true motives, delves into his workstation. There, she stumbles upon an image revealing cavities within a rock. Rebecca, upon closer inspection, recognizes these as potential microbial borings. Examining the sample under a microscope, they discover evidence of bacterial cell division. This revelation exposes Marco's lie, suggesting his refusal to share credit for the discovery. Infuriated, Charles radios Richard and Marco, declaring the dig site off-limits. However, Marco instructs Richard to feign ignorance, blaming a poor signal for missing the order. Ignoring instructions, Marco scoops up a soil sample. As he examines it closely, the ground beneath him trembles and abruptly gives way, engulfing Marco in an underground pit. Witnessing the collapse, Richard scrambles out of the rover to assist, but the steam obscures his vision. Moments after Richard calls for urgent backup, Charles and Lauren arrive on the scene to initiate a rescue operation. Richard, fearing the worst, assumes Marco is dead. Lauren, however, refuses to concede defeat and attempts to descend into the pit. Charles intervenes swiftly, deeming the unstable pit too hazardous. They strategize, assigning Lauren to monitor the situation, while Charles and Richard return to base for proper rescue equipment. Back at base, Kim pushes for a public announcement of their discovery. Richard, enraged, reminds her of Marco's demise, which Kim blames entirely on him for not following protocol. This sparks tension between them. The crew establishes contact with Mission Control, who, after reviewing their report, authorizes a high-risk retrieval mission for Marco. Before their departure, Robert urges Charles to reprimand Kim for her insensitive behavior, emphasizing that Marco's death wasn't his doing. However, Charles takes full responsibility for all crew mistakes. Charles leads a team consisting of Rebecca, Robert, and Vincent back to the dig site, leaving Lauren on guard duty in the rover. Suddenly, Lauren encounters someone attempting to enter the vehicle. Despite attempts to alert Charles via radio, the storm disrupts communication. Reaching the excavation site, they find Lauren missing. They theorize she fell into the pit. Vincent, secured by a rope, descends to investigate. As he nears the bottom, he observes a peculiar microbial growth on the rock face. The deeper he goes, the more overwhelmed he becomes, experiencing hyperventilation triggered by flashbacks to a past incident where he was accidentally trapped in the Aurora. Recognizing his distress, the others pull him back up. After regaining his composure, Vincent confirms he saw no sign of Lauren. Robert, surveying the area, discovers a puzzling sight: 2 sets of footprints leading away from the pit, in the direction of the base. This is illogical, as the rover would have been the obvious choice for transportation. The team contacts Kim, urging her to prepare for potential casualties. Kim, in turn, raises the possibility of Marco experiencing brain damage due to oxygen deprivation if his suit is compromised. Just then, Richard consults the tracking device and spots 2 figures approaching the base, 50 meters out. While Kim attempts to hail them on the radio, Richard rushes to the airlock to grant them entry. As Kim observes an unfamiliar figure lumbering towards the base, Richard disengages the airlock and Marco collapses onto the ground, his helmet sporting a gaping hole. Richard assists him in removing it, but recoils in horror as Marco now resembles a walking corpse. In a flash, Marco lunges to his feet and snatches an electric drill, aiming to attack Richard and plunging it into his stomach. Richard crumples but manages to muster the strength to trigger the alarm. Kim sprints towards the airlock, but the sight of Marco sends her fleeing to another room to take cover. Shortly after, Lauren arrives at the airlock as well, revealing her own infection. Richard grapples with the agonizing pain and manages to stumble into another room, slamming the door shut behind him. Lauren sets her sights on Kim instead, who engages the creature in a desperate fight, despite her lack of combat training. One of the creatures becomes momentarily distracted, drawn to a spilled liquid on the floor. Seizing the opportunity, Kim knocks the other creature down and flees, locking this door as well. On the verge of unconsciousness, Richard manages to gasp Mayday into the radio. When the others return, Charles insists they wait outside while he investigates, discovering a scene of utter chaos within. He locates Kim just as Marco begins smashing the glass door, and Charles instructs her to suit up while he attempts to fend off the creatures. The airlock hisses open and Marco emerges, a vacant shell of his former self. Charles pleads with him, but the infection has stripped him of reason. Kim suits up and rockets out, leaving Charles to fight his way to the escape pod. Infected astronauts swarm him, one sinking a knife into his shoulder. After a brutal struggle, Charles breaks free and rejoins the others. They seal the airlock, trapping their former friends inside. Vincent protests, but Kim forces him to confront the grotesque, inhuman creatures at the door. Desperate to escape, the group flees to the greenhouse dome. Rebecca, lacking medical expertise, tends to Charles' worsening wound. Grief washes over him as his memories of family fade. He whispers a request, tell them he was thinking of them. Suddenly, Charles attacks Robert. The others scramble to restrain him, fear rising. Vincent pins him down, but the hold cuts off Charles' air. Gasping, Charles utters a final, despairing prophecy. They'll never see home again. Vincent assumes the worst, but Kim acts fast, securing Charles to a table. The gruesome precaution weighs heavily on Vincent, who drapes a sheet over the body. Their debate on what to do next is interrupted by a chilling sight. The infected, using brute force, have blasted their way through the airlock. The pounding on the greenhouse door intensifies, just as tremors rack Charles' seemingly lifeless form. A moment later, a monitor flickers to life, revealing the infected at the dome's entrance. The line between life and death is blurred, and the true fight for survival is about to begin. Cut off from the space station due to a comms outage, the crew needs a lifeline. Vincent, ever the volunteer, takes a daring gamble, crawling through the oxygen line back to base and fixing the comms. Back at the dome, Rebecca extracts a blood sample from Charles, revealing a horrifying truth. He's infected too. Panic sets in for Vincent as he crawls through the claustrophobic pipe, memories of his accident resurfacing. Rebecca, his voice of reason on the radio, reminds him everyone is scared, urging him to push forward. The base Vincent reaches is a macabre sight, splattered with blood, but his mission remains clear: fix the comms. Meanwhile, Rebecca wrestles with a desperate idea. Could antibiotics hold the key? She administers a dose to Charles, his body responding with violent tremors. Kim cautions it might be a reflex reaction, not a fight against the infection. When the tremors subside, Rebecca's second blood test brings both relief and grim news. The bacteria isn't eradicated, but its growth is stunted. Kim springs into action, turning the solution into an airborne spray. It's a desperate gamble, but their only hope to fight back. Back in the base, Vincent establishes contact with Aurora, but celebration turns to dread as the power dies. A glance at the monitor by Robert reveals a chilling development. Their infected friends, unable to breach the dome, are returning to the base. A risky strategy emerges: lure the creatures back to the airlock with an unlocked door, then unleash the antibiotic spray. It's a gamble, but in the face of this evolving threat, they have no other choice. The decontamination spray sputters to life as an infected astronaut stumbles in, the parasitic creature writhing in pain on the floor. A flicker of hope fades as Rebecca realizes the medicine is failing. The bacteria is adapting. Meanwhile, Vincent navigates the darkened corridors searching for the power source. A horrifying sight greets him: Richard, transformed by the parasite. Without hesitation, Vincent pummels Richard's head with his flashlight, but the creature is relentless. Desperate, Vincent retreats towards the oxygen line, crawling through the narrow tunnel. He warns Rebecca, who is waiting at the control panel, that he left the other end open. They scramble to get him back, helmets hastily strapped on. Kim throws a desperate Hail Mary, 2 vials of antibiotics launched at the unstoppable Richard. With escape their only option, Vincent and Rebecca race to the airlock. Robert, however, witnesses a horrifying sight. Charles' body begins to reanimate. Sealing the passage behind him, he abandons Kim to the creature's relentless assault. Reuniting with Vincent and Rebecca, Robert offers a grim update. Kim didn't make it. Inside the airlock, another infected astronaut stirs, awakening from the decontamination spray. Robert unleashes a torrent of rage, kicking the creature violently. Finally, they breach the airlock and flee, but their escape is marred by a brutal betrayal. Their infected comrade plunges a pair of scissors into Rebecca's leg. Racing for the rover, Vincent administers the remaining antibiotic, a desperate gamble to save Rebecca from the relentless bacteria. The crew departs in the vehicle, but quickly discover they lack sufficient power to reach the designated landing zone. Forced to travel by foot, Rebecca's injury renders her unable to walk. While Vincent suggests returning Rebecca to the base for medical attention, Robert proposes abandoning her due to the suspected infection. Rebecca counters that Robert might also be infected, referencing Charles' attack. Robert deflects the accusation, recalling another vehicle at the excavation site. They change course to retrieve it. Upon arrival, Robert ventures on foot to the other vehicle and radios Vincent, demanding Rebecca's abandonment. Vincent firmly rejects the order, prompting Robert's solo escape. Vincent attempts to stop him, but it's in vain. To add insult to injury, Vincent notices the infected closing in amidst the swirling sandstorm. He throws the rover into high gear, hoping to lose them in the tempest. Vincent believes a full night's charge from the sun will provide enough power to reach the landing site by morning. Meanwhile, the Aurora spaceship departs the space station, setting course for Mars. The next morning, Vincent awakens to a message from the space station. A rescue team is en route. His attempt to respond proves futile. They can't hear him. A chilling realization dawns: Rebecca is gone. He follows her tracks, eventually finding her. Now succumbing to the infection, Rebecca pleads with him to keep his distance. In a desperate attempt to save her, Vincent recklessly approaches Rebecca. In a final act, she removes her helmet, sacrificing herself to suffocation. Within minutes, her reanimated corpse attacks, forcing Vincent to fight her off. Racked with grief, Rebecca begs for a merciful end. Vincent, faced with an agonizing choice, grants her wish by smashing her head with a rock. A glimmer of hope emerges as Vincent spots the approaching Aurora. He races towards the landing site, but his joy is short-lived as he sees three monstrous figures approaching the ship as well. Desperately, he tries to warn the Aurora crew not to open the hatch, but the raging storm blocks his communication. Immediately upon the rescue team's emergence, they were savagely attacked and slaughtered by the creatures. Their horrifying screams echoed over the radio, reaching Vincent. Undeterred, he pressed on, discovering the creatures feasting on the remains of the rescue team, oblivious to his presence. A corpse, in an advanced state of decay, added to the gruesome scene. Vincent entered the ship and secured the door, only to find Robert in the cockpit. While still conscious, Robert exhibited early signs of infection, prompting Vincent to conclude that they couldn't risk bringing the bacteria back to Earth. Robert quickly attacks him and a fight breaks out. During the struggle, Robert stabs Vincent's helmet. As the ship begins to fly uncontrollably and shakes violently, the men continue to fight. Vincent repeatedly headbutts Robert until he stops moving. Next, he removes the bloodstain from his helmet with Robert's blood, and opens the hatch, ejecting Robert's body into space. In the few seconds he struggles to breathe, Vincent imagines Rebecca comforting him. Afterwards, Vincent sends a message to the station detailing everything that happened. Aware of the possibility of infection, he explains his plan to crash the ship on Mars as soon as he shows any symptoms. The Aurora continues its flight while he awaits a response. Make sure to subscribe and enable notifications for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.